All right, I think we're ready to get started here. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. And today we are going to be discussing this is part of the Rapid Strategic Planning Technical Assistance webinar. And today we're covering assuring alignment with vision, mission, values, and your TOR applications. So this is hosted by the National American Indian and Alaska Native ATTC. I'm Kate Trams, and as well as me working on this project here at the ATTC are Annalena Skinstad, who's our director, and Jeff Lidolter, who is one of our program managers. So feel free to get in touch with any of us if you have questions about the project. And I'll just let everyone know right now we are going to be redirecting you to a survey after today's event for compliance with GIPRA, which is required by our funder. So we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to fill out that survey. If you don't get redirected to it, we will send the link to you in an email along with the link to the recording and handouts as well. So look for that in the next couple of days. And actually, before I pass it on to Pam and Harold, I just wanted to mention that we have a couple of things that we're going to be doing differently this time. We have a couple of poll questions that will come up, so I'll give instructions for that when we're ready for it. But also, we will have specific times where we will be taking questions, and if you happen to be calling in, or if you happen to have a microphone in your computer, you can use the option to raise your hand. If you see on the top black menu bar of the webinar screen, there is a little person with his hand raised. If you click on that, I can then allow you to have audio rights and you can ask your question verbally. But if you don't have that, you can still send your questions in the chat box. But that's an option that we will have today as well. So with that, I think I'll pass things over to Pam and Harold, unless there's any other questions for me.
Oh, I just wanted to say, Kate, thanks for the introduction. I'm Jeff Lidolter. I'll be your point of contact, so if you have any questions about our webinars, my email is right in the contact and support box.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Pam Peterson-Baston. I was on the webinar yesterday. For those of you who were not on that call, I am a consultant with JBS International. I've been in the substance abuse prevention and treatment field for 40 years, both as a provider and heading up the state of Florida's publicly funded drug treatment system. And I've spent many years in opioid use disorder work, including with medication-assisted treatment, and I also work on the state-targeted response to the opioid crisis with one of the states in a very similar initiative. It's a pleasure to be here. Harold?
Yeah, thank you, Pam, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Harold Tarbell. I'm a Mohawk from the community of Akwesasne, which is over in northern New York. I'm a member of the St. Regis Mohawk tribe, but we're a U.S.-Canada tribe over there, and I'm a former tribal chairman. And yeah, one of the things that we did when I was tribal chairman was build our treatment center. And I was also actively involved in NANACOA, the Native America, I'm trying to remember the terminology, but part of the healing movement, and sort of got a lot of experience in that way. And I've been an independent facilitator for 20 years and doing strategic planning throughout that. I do a lot of work in Canada and a bit in the United States, and here in Canada I serve as the speaker or the chair when the chiefs meet nationally, so sort of in the equivalent of what would be the National Congress of American Indians, which, by the way, I used to be a vice president of when I was a tribal chairman in my own community. And so I'll be providing some of the strategic planning guidance here. Just in terms of the agenda for today, yesterday's session, I had mentioned that when sort of another way of gathering information sessions is through focus groups, or gathering information and input is through focus groups, because then you can get a little bit more quantitative by the design. I said I would post a tool that is often used to help shape those meetings, and so this is actually what I use for this agenda here. It comes from the Grove Consultants, and I like their work, and that's one of, they have a strategic visioning or a visual strategic visioning process that they use, which uses a lot of these graphics, and I'll be using those as one example of the tools as we go. But essentially, here's our agenda. Again, what we're trying to do is support your understanding of your ability to fulfill your grant, clarify the strategic planning process to give you some insight into that, and then today we'll focus on the development of the vision, mission, principles, and value statements. There's some norms there, and then of course we've tried to lay out the 90 minutes as carefully as we can. We try to open up the floor for questions, whether they're coming through the chat room or during these designated times through the raise your hand function 3 times to sort of make this as interactive as possible. And then also sort of as we go through this agenda, just making sure that we begin and end sort of connecting it to the work of the technical center in terms of its responsibilities to you. Pam?
Okay, so just as a reminder, we will be addressing the strategic plan requirement that was in the funding opportunity announcement on page 5, and that is where you will be conducting, using the results of a current needs assessment, if you have one available to your tribe, or carry out a strategic planning process to conduct a needs and capacity assessment to identify gaps in resources from which to build prevention, treatment, and/or community-based recovery support services. Also completing a comprehensive strategic plan based on the most current epidemiological data for the tribe to address the gaps in prevention, treatment, and recovery that are identified by the tribe. You are able to use existing plans if you have one, or take one that might not specifically address opioids, and then adapt that or add to that plan to add your opioid strategies consistent with what you signed up to do in your grant application. Also, the data that we covered yesterday in the webinar has been, that whole webinar has been archived, so if you weren't able to participate yesterday or you had to drop off early, one of the tribes was literally engaged in an exciting strategic planning process, and they asked, do we have to, be on this and that? And we said, no, just drop off and continue your strategic planning process. So they might want to go back and listen to the archived webinar. And so any of you who were not able to participate should be able to find that resource on the TOR resource website. Next.
Yeah, and just before you go to that one, Pam, I did want to note 2 things. So just on this slide, so when it talks about needs assessments or strategic plans, essentially what you see here is they want to make sure you're identifying and addressing the gaps. And so whatever planning tool you're going to use, and you're going to hear later that people are using multiple tools, I think that's really what you're trying to get at, and then you're trying to get at these goals on the next stage. Just one technical or one logistical piece. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see some files, and the handouts that are there, that's actually these PowerPoint slides. So if you want to download them, that's available there. Pam, back to you.
Excellent. Okay. Next slide. So just a reminder that while you may have some goals that you want to add to your strategic planning process, there are some requirements around the goals that are involved in this initiative, and that is that the primary goal of this funding award is to increase access to culturally appropriate and evidence-based treatment, including medication-assisted treatment using one of the 3 FDA-approved medications for the treatment of opioid use disorder. And so we said yesterday that included methadone, and buprenorphine, which is in 2 different products, Suboxone or Subutex, and those can be either injectable or taken orally, and then also naloxone or naltrexone, which is also, you might know as Vivitrol. So you must provide medication-assisted treatment, and then also, as you might have indicated in your grant application, a number of other strategies to support access to medication-assisted treatment. Also, you must reduce the unmet treatment need and opioid overdose-related deaths through the provision of prevention treatment and or recovery activities for OUD. So these are goals that should be very prominent in your strategic planning process. Next.
Pam, I just wanted to
Next
mention
slide.
that this system works a little bit differently than yesterday, so you should be able to advance slides yourself without having to share.
Okay, all right. I only have one more, so if you just tell me which way to do that, I'll be happy to do it.
Yeah, it should be there now,
Just
but if
a little arrow to the bottom.
Yeah, yep, that's it.
I got it. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you for that. So also we took a review of some of the tribal applications that have come in, and we're asking for those of you who haven't had a chance to turn in your applications that if you would like us to review them and to be in a position to provide technical assistance specific to what you proposed in your application, that we would welcome a chance to review them. We've got a number of them, and just a quick sample to show you the kinds of examples that have come in. We have tribes that are actually hiring a strategic planning consultant, and so that's to develop a very comprehensive strategic plan. We also have those that are using a distinct planning method. One tribe, for example, discussed developing a framework and or tools, and we make the point that the process of going through that is as important as the product, and many times in that process you're involving other community partners. Linking to the existing tribal action plans, that's another strategy that was identified in some of the applications, with a focus on conducting a needs assessment. So if you've got that existing tribal action plan, then looking at how do you conduct a needs assessment of how to fit this new piece into that existing tribal action plan. And then linking to other ongoing strategic planning processes that are funded by other sources. So in some instances, tribes have other strategic plans that they've had to do for other initiatives, and then finding a way to link this to that so they don't end up with lots of disparate plans, but actually one that might have components to it that all work together. Next. I think we have polling questions now. So we'll go to the polling question, and I'll turn it over to Kate.
Okay, great. So if you'll notice on just to the right of your the slides, you should have a poll open now. I'll actually open up both of them. We just wanted to get an idea of what kind of approaches you're working with to create your strategic plan so far. And you'll notice that the last option in the first poll asks to briefly describe if you're using some other approach, and so if you can do that in the chat box, that would be great. Sorry about that. If you my microphone up here a little bit, but again, we're just going through these poll questions to the right of the slides, and so if you can take a minute there to answer those questions, and then I believe that Harold and Pam might address how people responded to those, so that'll just help us have some more interaction with the content today. Thank you.
Yeah, Pam, Kate, how much time did you want to pause for that poll to be finished?
It looks like we can probably move ahead. I think most people who were answering have done so at this point. So, did you want me to comment or say anything about the results, or did you want to take a look at that yourself?
Um, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it looks like there 11 people said that they are completing a comprehensive plan, um, and 7 people said they're utilizing or adapting an existing tribal or organizational plan. 9 said that they're linking to an ongoing strategic planning process. We didn't have anybody respond saying that they were using some other method or a distinct method other than strategic planning. And then for the second question, looks like a number of people are using mission, vision, or values and principles statements. Looks like it's fairly spread across those, and people could indicate multiple. So it's possible that people are using a couple or all of those. So we've got 11 people saying they're using a mission statement, 10 people saying they're using a vision statement, and 7 indicating the values or principles statements.
Okay, so thanks, Kate. So essentially what we're seeing there is that you do have some material to work for. And we talked about yesterday in terms of the getting ready, it's about gathering that information and then sort of doing the analysis about, you know, is it workable? Is it alignable? Does it need revision? So, you know, again, you'll be looking at that. And in yesterday's PowerPoint, we had a bit of a checklist in terms of all the various pieces or some of the various pieces that could be in a strategic plan. So that's good. Yeah. So about 20, look like 28 different responses there if you look in both of the questions. So pretty good participation from the total number we have online. So thanks for doing that. And that just really helps us to get a good handle on kind of how we can be a little bit more helpful to you guys. Again, I want to emphasize the request from the Technical Center to encourage you to share the narrative portion of your, at least the narrative portion of your application, because then that helps us to draw some information out, particularly as we get to the later webinars. So just carrying through this process. So we have talked a couple times about what is a strategic planning process, and here is a fairly typical 7-stage process that you would go through for a strategic planning process, and we've highlighted the stage we're focusing on today. And in terms of the layout of our webinars, the first 4 are really focused on these stages, and then the last 2 are focused on, you know, sort of finding some results. And yesterday we did have one of the tribes that was willing to share the results of their work when we get to that stage. In fact, they may share it as soon as it's approved. So anyway, we are going to focus on sort of the developing a vision, mission, and the core value statements. In terms of the way we've sort of laid out these slides here, what we're trying to do is really give you a little bit of you know, some definition of each of these vision, mission, values, and principles. You know, some of the tips and, you know, in terms of what are some of the lessons learned, some of the best practices themselves. And then we're also sharing a few facilitation techniques that can help you to the degree you can use them and adapt them to your needs. You're not required to use them, but to the degree they're helpful to you, they can help you then sort of work through the strategic planning process and either work alone with a small planning group, you know, with a larger stakeholder engagement. You know, so these tools are quite adaptable to that. One of the lessons learned from the tools, and we talked about it yesterday, is it's critical that they be adapted to the needs, you know, in the context that you're working in. And so, and we've tried to leave as much time as possible for questions on this one. So just looking at vision statement. And essentially what this is trying to say is really you want a motivating statement. You want it relatively short. And, you know, you really want to sort of describe in current terms what is the change you will have created. And so this is just, you'll see a couple different, essentially some descriptions or some definitions here in the first 2 bullet points. The third bullet point talks of this issue of the fact that going through this process, the third and fourth speak to this issue of going through the process is as valuable as the product itself. And so here it just talks about team development, change management, and, really allowing people to have that sense of ownership over it. But it does say that, when you're trying to shape and draft your vision statement, you're trying to do lots of things in, a fairly short phrases. Be comprehensive, be integrated, be sustainable, support change, support development, support innovation, so really kind of pushing the conversation and doing that. The strategic thinking that goes into the statement, then sets the frame for the work that comes behind it. Really, in a way, establishes the place, what that journey is going to look like and where you're going to get through the work that you're doing on your opioid response strategies. The next slide just talks about some of the key characteristics that we see in vision statements. And I will say this, there are many vision statements available. You can search tribes, you can search addiction organizations, you can search generally. You'll find many versions out there. Visions, missions, values, and principle statements come in all shapes and sizes. Some of the techniques and some of the strategic planning models are, pretty flexible about what they should look like. Some are very specific about what they should look like. But again, it really is where you come to rest in terms of your, where you've built consensus around that vision statement. And, the same applies to the mission statement and the values and principle statement. In terms of these characteristics, so you're trying to describe a future, but you also want to describe an attainable future. So you want to be realistic about it. You want to bring the lessons learned in. You want to push yourself a little bit. So that's really what you're trying to do. There's a couple of bullet points here which then talk about sort of some drafting instructions in terms of what you want to do. So, you're trying to communicate to everybody. I always like this reference to the fact most people read the stuff in terms of what's it mean for me and what's in it for me. And so really in terms of a motivating, inspiring, future-oriented vision statement, you are trying to get that benefit across to them. You are writing in the present tense so that it's as if in that 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, whatever time frame you want to set out, you have achieved these things. And so again, that is designed to be sort of motivational in that sense. And then just trying to find, that kind of language that's not too jargony and that people go, again, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Some people say you must be able to, rattle off your vision statement. Others is, it must be memorable in some degree. So you just want it, easy to remember. You want it to be distinctive. You want it to be as relevant to the work that you're doing as possible. I just note here that I draw a lot of this from the Association for Strategic Planning, the body of knowledge, just to, and a variety of other sources as well, but that's a good group that I do belong to.
Harold, this is Pam. I just want to do a quick technology check. Are your slides advancing? On my end, they weren't, so, okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm advancing them myself. I think I'm now on the techniques to consider. And I'm not reading them, so I'm really trying not to read them. I'm, trying to speak to them. And
okay, it looks like they might maybe do, if you have them open in PowerPoint, then I don't know if you're looking at them there, but they're not advancing on the in the webinar screen.
Oh, sorry. I mean, I'm looking in the software, the Adobe Connect software, and advancing the screens, and I'm currently on the techniques to consider. Are they not moving on your end?
No, sorry about that.
Oh my God, what slide are you on?
Okay, and now I've got us caught up to techniques to consider, but let's make sure that you can advance slides now that'll move for us. So.
Okay, I'll just move this slide. So I've gone over to the cover story vision. Did it move on your side?
No.
Okay, Kate, well then what we'll do is we'll go back to yesterday's technique. I'll ask you to move it. So let's put us back on the techniques to consider slide.
Okay.
All right, so, Here, I'm just going to give you a few techniques that can be used to shape the vision statement. And as we go through, I'll go into some of these in some detail, but I've kind of mixed it, interspersed them throughout the presentation just to so that I'm not belaboring you with 15 minutes of instructions on how to use this. But essentially, these can be fairly straightforward. So the first technique is look at these definitions that are here in these slides or available elsewhere, or some of the templates which I'm going to show you, and use that to help you write. Whether it's with yourself or with your planning group, or with a small group, you can just simply try to write one following those instructions and essentially come to some consensus, which will be, pretty much near the mark of what you need. The second bullet point, we talk about using a drafting exercise, and essentially that's working with a small group, and it's just, starting with a blank page, or you could use one of these templates, and essentially you write down your idea of a vision statement. You then pair up, you guys work together to shape, sort of do a combined vision statement for yourselves. Then two groups of two come together. You then do that process again, and you just continue that, and so on, process until you're all working together on a final statement. And essentially, that's a really low-tech, straightforward way of drafting a consensus statement. The Technology of Participation, or the Institute of Cultural Affairs, it's Technology and Participation in Canada, Institute of Cultural Affairs or vice versa, Technology of Participation in the United States, Institute of Cultural Affairs in Canada. They have what's called a workshop methodology. I'll come to it later, but essentially it is a cards technique, so it's kind of usable with groups of 20 or more. And it's from a visioning and a mission kind of statement, you can do what's called a practical visioning and mission development exercise, and I'll walk through that a little bit later. Visualization is also very helpful just to get people ready, whether it's yourself or a small group or a large group. This sort of a guided visualization process could be done in one of two ways. You'll note down in the files there's a guided imaging visualization document. That's one that I'm currently using with some Indigenous communities around developing community safety plans. And essentially, it's got the fundamentals of what you would do, and it's dim the lights, get comfortable, and then close your eyes and then walk through this process. And it's just a way of helping people relax and sort of connect with sort of their creative thinking. And you'll just see that as a process, and we've attached that as a bit of a takeaway in the files. That can also be done by showing a video. I happen to be using one that I've noted here in the slide, Celebrate What's Right with the World, with DeWitt Jones. He's a former National Geographic photographer, and it's an excellent source, but there's probably others that are out there. I just happen to be using it in this particular exercise. Interestingly enough, we've been using it with Indigenous communities. DeWitt is not Native. As facilitators, we had this long conversation about whether that was appropriate or not, but ironically, in the communities, no one has noticed that or mentioned that. That's not been an issue because, again, guided visualization is guided visualization, and it's been a very effective tool. So again, another technique that you can use for that. Just one more slide, I think, or two more slides. In the Grove facilitation technique, here's a couple of graphics which tap into sort of, again, more creative thinking. It still does the same things that the original descriptive slides talked about, but there's different kinds of whistles and bells here, and this one's one of my favorites. Again, we can use it individually, with small groups, with large groups, breakout groups. You can do all kinds of things with this particular one, and these are very adaptable. I would only point out that the Grove just requests that if anybody uses it, that you keep their copyright on the bottom of the slide that you'll see there. Anyway, this is a good one. Just who doesn't like to see their think of their story in terms of magazines or newspapers? I would probably say this would probably have to update this one to be sort of the blog or the website or the mobile site or something like that. But I think you get the point there in terms of a particular tool that you can use. And Kate, if we move over to the next one, the vision themes. So I'm trusting you're following along, Kate.
Yep, we can see the slides just fine.
All right, and so we're on the vision theme slide. So this one a little bit more sort of holistic, a little bit more circular. Again, very popular version, but essentially it's just another tool to use to, help you or a group start, putting some language down. So you can see here, when you think of that, what are we trying to get at? What are we trying to achieve? So what's our essential purpose? What are some of the elements that are there? So in this case, you could imagine there's some element, you have a specific vision around prevention or treatment or recovery or for the organization or for the community or within the, let's say, the substance abuse sector in general. So, you could see how different themes could play out in here in terms of a vision statement. So again, quick review of what a vision statement is, some tips for it, and then some possible tools. And I think at this point, although we're a bit behind schedule, let's turn to questions. And so, Kate, I think we're back to you on questions. So they have two options that they can do in the chat room or in the raising the hands. So are there questions? Kate, did you want to talk a little bit about the raising hands approach, which will allow the participants to speak as well?
Yeah. So if you do want to ask a question verbally, and if you have a microphone in your computer or if you have called in, you can click on the little person raising his hand at the top of the menu, and then I can give you audio rights to do that. Otherwise, you can submit your questions in the chat box as well. There was a question earlier that someone submitted. Does a complete plan mean the template that you provided? I'm guessing they're referring to the template that was included yesterday.
Two things. So if you're doing a complete plan, you do want to have the vision, the mission, the values, you want to have the environmental scan, and then you'll get to the template itself, which is sort of the action part of the plan itself. And then in terms of these particular templates that we're showing and, techniques we're showing today, these are purely optional and just provided as a support tool to be used or not used. You're not required, let's say, to use a Grove template or the Institute of Cultural Affairs template or anything like that. Pam, did you want to speak to the action planning template or the rapid strategic planning template?
Yeah, you said it correctly. That was just an attempt to give you something to start with if you didn't already have a strategic plan, or if you had a small grant award and wanted to, didn't have the ability to hire, let's say, a strategic planning consultant, to give you something to be able to begin focusing what the objectives and the activities that would help you reach the stated opioid goals in your TOR application. So that was also an optional form.
Yeah, but Pam, you did mention that you've run that by SAMHSA and they're fine if the plan is that template.
That's correct. That was a voluntary. Nobody is required to use it, and you're encouraged to use your own if you have one, or adapt one of your own, or use that or something like that for the due date coming up 60 days after grant award.
Okay. So you just double check on the person who asked that question, make sure we answered it satisfactorily. And maybe the other way to use the raise your hands features, for those of you who indicated that you do have a vision statement, if you have them handy and you wouldn't mind reading them to us, that would be very helpful. I do have a sample that I pulled from the St. Regis mock tribe at the very end of the presentation, but again, it would be great to see what others, to the degree you're able to share, it'd be great to see what others are doing. Okay. And Sandra, were you typing in something? I guess you can't answer me. Come to think of it.
Yes, Sandra did respond and wrote that yes, that is what she meant, and that is what she meant to put in the poll that they will use. I believe that's what she was saying. So
Okay. Good.
yeah.
Yeah, I realized I wasn't in the right chat box. Is there anyone who is able to share a vision statement that they're going to be working from? Or perhaps we'll sort of leave that question on the table, and if someone can get organized to do that, that would be great. All right, so maybe what I'll do is I'll move to the mission statement component. And again, the chat room is still open and the raise hand function's there. So to the degree anybody wants to, needs to bring a question up, that's fine. So I'm going to move my slide forward, and I've just moved to the mission statement slide. And let me just check, Kate, is everybody's slide moving now? Or am I still going to rely on you to move it?
No, actually, we had mistakenly opened up a function that allows everybody to go at their own pace with the slides, but now that has been restored, so we're all following along with you. Thank you.
So if I go from back to question and then go to mission, the slides are moving?
Yep.
All good?
Yeah, we're following exactly what you can see. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, that's what I was assuming earlier. That's why I went through that. All right, so let's turn to the mission statement then again. And essentially what you're trying to do here is if the vision statement is sort of broader motivating future, essentially the mission statement is your promise to each other about how you're going to get there. So, just in terms of a couple of content pieces, right? So I always like to think of it as that promise or the blueprint. And it's often can be, fairly short. Again, much like visions, same thing on missions. I've seen them of all shapes and sizes, from a phrase to a sentence to a paragraph. The longest one I ever saw was I saw a vision and mission statement that was 3 pages long, maybe longer. The shortest one I ever saw was an entire strategic plan placed together on 3 business cards attached together front and back, which was a bit of a gimmick. It was the Calgary YMCA here in Canada, and it was, but it did the job. It got attention, it communicated the message, and it let you know where they were trying to get to, what the work they were involved in, and where their strategic focus was. But essentially here, mission statement kind of boils down to describing who you are, who you're serving, what you're doing, and how you do it. And then something about how that then connects to your purpose and does, provide benefits to others. And then you're starting to get into the layers of the organization itself. And here's essentially a couple different definitions. So there's a great book out there called Strategic Planning in Not-for-Profit Organizations. And this definition is taken from that. Essentially this formula, this 2-part formula. So a mission statement is a statement of purpose. So really, what you're trying to achieve. In some ways, it's the reason the organization was put together. it does talk about, again, often we're put together to solve problems, and clearly in this particular strategic focus on opioids, there is a focused problem that, you are then trying to bring the attention of the community and the resources of this particular grant to bear on. The second statement that would be an mission statement, again, is that piece about layering into what the organization does in, not terrible detail, but enough to give people a handle on what the organization does. So in a tribal level, we would be talking about governance and community engagement and program and service delivery, community safety. So those kinds of things. In a health organization, we would be talking about, we provide primary care, behavioral health. We provide clinics and doctors and dentists and pharmacies. So those kinds of what's that constellation that sort of in a nutshell says what's the business that we're in. And I often say that's sort of then try to figure out what's our business lines that we're doing, just to bring in some of the corporate language. So you'll see in that second statement when you're talking about it, the first statement of purpose is the end you're trying to get to. The second statement about what you're doing, so your business lines, is the means that you're using to get there. So again, in that sort of still fairly high level, one of the political challenges in drafting vision and mission statements is often people want to see certain things named. So they have a pet project or they have a real priority and they want it named as early and as often as possible in the strategic plan. So you'll see them try to keep anchoring it there, not realizing that there may be better places where those more specific things could be mentioned as you kind of go through that, a strategic plan, and then you also get down into sort of the more detailed operational and project plans, which, in many ways are reflected in your application. The second bullet point there at the bottom is another version, which is the balanced scorecard uses this definition, and they are really strong about you must do A, B, C, and D in our process, and you must do it the way we do it. My philosophy is a little bit differently in terms of making the models work for you. But this is their definition of a mission statement. They prefer to keep them as short as possible. So it's the same approach they have on vision. Our mission is to provide who are we providing it to with what are we providing for what's the benefit. So just trying to find that really quick, simple way. So as you can see from these two examples, it could, you can get very brief, you can get very expansive. Again, just depends on where you need to come to consensus in your organization on that. And again, some characteristics of effective ones, right? So it has the purpose, focus, your areas of focus, your areas of interest. What's the path you're pursuing, boundaries within which you operate. So in some respects, it's also saying, well, we may not do these other things. It aligns with the vision statement. One of the points that often happens here too is there's always a discussion about which comes first, vision or mission, and I've seen them both ways. Essentially, as I've gone through it, I would describe it this way. In my view, again, it's what works best for your organization. I try not to necessarily quibble about which one goes first or not. It's really about, does it help you achieve the job you're trying to get to? And the distinction I would say is this: if the vision goes first, it's often much more broader and expansive, and then the mission statement then tries to sort of say, here's our part in achieving that vision statement. What I see was when the mission statement goes first and the vision statement comes later, essentially it kind of rephrases it in the sense that if we are in this business, then this is the piece of the vision that we will create. So it tends to in a way make the vision a bit more practical and more specifically related to the work of this particular piece of the organization or the organization itself or the tribe overall. So that might be another way of just thinking about how you might align with existing vision and mission statements, although there's nothing wrong with just using them as they are and then recognizing that your project can feed that. And the language I use is often your project can be informed by those overall vision and mission statements and contribute to their achievement, if you want to think of it in a logical, linear way. Yeah, so vision, starting to get more action-oriented, more functional. So again, that whole business line component. So this is a technique which can help you to draft it. And essentially the next few slides are all the same technique. So essentially it's called the workshop technique in the technology of participation or in the Institute of Cultural Affairs, depending on where you're looking at it. But ironically, when I look at it, and it can be used in all kinds of ways, you can actually design an entire conference using this this particular tool. But largely, we use it for visioning and more of the smaller statement development. But really, the way I describe this is I call it the cards technique. And so, essentially, what it does boil down to is idea cards. And so it's a process of having people, again, work individually, do some of their own drafting and their own thinking and shaping about a mission statement or a vision statement using the descriptive slides above to sort of set that context. You create a focus question. What will we have achieved? What is the business we are in? What is the benefit that will result from our work? Like you start with that kind of a focus question. You'll see that sort of in the middle, on the slide you see there, it's called the workshop question. And then you will then work through this. You'll set the context for what you're doing, and that's well set in the FOA and in your applications, and probably in the other plans and documents from your organizations or tribes that you're looking at. And then you'll go through this process of individual brainstorming, group consensus development and organizing, and then group naming of these cards to get you, in a sense, a bit of a table that will kind of help you describe the working environment that you're going to be in. These next slides, this is essentially the same slide as above, but essentially showing you in sort of graphic terms what's happening with these idea cards, in the sense of you're going to get a lot of ideas individually. You're going to work as a small group in tables to come up with some, winnow those down a bit. All the tables are going to bring them forward. I've actually used the card. Then you're going to sort of go through that process of grouping and pairing and grouping, and then you're going to look at the intention of these cards, try to find a good motivating title for it, and then the resolve is what the result looks like in terms of clarifying that. And there's a bit of processing you do to address that. I've actually used this process even just to write strategic plans and to write reports, in the sense that there's often so many ideas and we're trying to unravel that complexity. We're trying to make choices about what it is we can reasonably do in the given time frame with the available financial, human, and information resources, and other treatment, prevention, and recovery resources that we have available. These next few slides are essentially the instructions, and I won't go through them. I've just tried to paraphrase them, but it's set the focus question, ask people to work individually. You're developing, I always do top 10, so people have lots of ideas about what could be in a vision, what could be in a mission, what the organization could do. I always ask people to then cut that in half, boil it down to 5. And essentially the whole point there is if strategic planning is about making choices with limited resources, you're never going to be able to do everything you want. And so you might as well start making those hard choices right off the bat. And this exercise sort of tries to get that across. You then take those ideas, and as an individual, you write them on a separate card, which is essentially a 8.5 by 11 page ripped in half, or an index card, or those large post-it note cards. There's the instructions for how to make sure that it's readable. A couple of techniques for making sure that you're communicating the intent, and really people can understand the card when they see it up. Then you're bringing them together as a table. Everybody shares their cards, so 5 people at a table. There's 50 cards. You share all those cards, and then there's a process by which the table develops consensus about key cards to bring forward. You'll see 5 adjectives in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are simply used as a bit of a tool to help them discuss the cards and to pick a consensus card that then goes up on the wall. Easiest, because again, you want some early wins in your, let's call it your change management strategy. Hardest, you do want sort of those stretch goals. Catalytic's an interesting one in the sense of it is the thing that if you can achieve opens up the door to many other things. The bowling ball is the example that's often used. You throw the bowling ball later down the road, it causes, constructive disruption and many other opportunities. So that's what you're looking for there. Boldest, peak performance. Again, just you can use whatever adjectives you want, but it's a way of pulling those ideas from them. The caveat at the bottom, this always happens in this exercise, so people are very attached to their ideas, and you will see a lot of similar ideas, and so people then take them together, and they'll give you, for their easiest card or their catalytic card, they'll give you 3 or 5 cards stapled together, or glued together, or taped together. And essentially, that's not very helpful. And so what you ask them to do is write it down. And I even tape cards together and wave them around so that they know we're on to that trick. So anyway, just a facilitation technique. And here's the final process for how the table brings this to the wall, how you organize with them those cards. You could do the thing yourself, or your facilitator could do it yourself, and there's a certain value to that. There's a greater ownership, commitment, and buy-in if, in fact, you do it with a group process. Altogether, this takes 90 minutes to 2 hours to do this exercise with a group of about 25 people. And then once you've done that, you do the naming, you organize that table. It's usually pretty powerful. You're making sure you're reading it out loud. And then you're having a bit of a debrief, right? Because once that's up there, it is a celebratory moment, but you also want to sort of get people to then say, so in a way, what's the so what? What did we learn from this process? How does it help us with our strategic plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's that technique there. I think that's the last one on the mission work and that particular technique. So again, are there any questions? Or Pam, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think that was great.
Okay. So I will warn the participants. I'm very happy to just be enamored of my own voice. So please ask questions, even to the degree of how could we be more helpful. Those would be great comments to hear as well. I think as we keep working through this, we're also under the same time pressures you guys are feeling in the sense of how this project came about and getting it ready. And so we'll have to give some thought to how much wording we can offer, how much of a filling in of the templates we can do. So we'll give some I'll give some thought to that as I sort of work through. Yesterday the comment was the earlier we can get you examples, the better off it is for you guys.
Harold, I just wanted to jump in because someone shared some of their organization's core values. So this is from Evangeline sharing Ho-Chunk Nation core values. We are guided by our values to honor traditional Ho-Chunk values such as our kinship system, respect, especially for elders and veterans, sharing and equality, and the importance of the Ho-Chunk language, recognize and respect individual beliefs regardless of the level or type of practice, respect the individual needs of all community members while working to bring out the best in the individual, family, and community, create a safe environment by abiding by the highest standards of professional conduct, including confidentiality and ethics, understand and respect the history of the Ho-Chunk Nation and how it continues to impact our families and community, and maintain a holistic approach to healing, family, community, spirituality, and work. And then I noticed someone asked below that if these examples can be on the web page. And I'll just mention that as this session is being recorded, you'll actually be able to see all of the chats in the recording, so that will all be there as well. And then Evangeline also shared the department vision of the health department vision in the whole Ho-Chunk Nation, which is building a strong mind, body, and spirit together. And we care, looks like that's in the Ho-Chunk language. And the health department mission, which is to promote a high quality of life with holistic healthcare to those we serve with an emphasis on the traditional Ho-Chunk way of life, and to empower each individual and family to make informed decisions regarding their present and future health. And she says that they're currently working at integrating care and having behavioral health moved into the clinic as of June 2018.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you very much for sharing that, Evangeline. Is it Evangeline or Evangeline? But essentially what you see there is it looks like you have multiple layers of your strategic elements. All right, so looks like there might be some tribal level stuff. There may be some health department overhaul. There might be, does it look like there's a behavioral health component, part of your health department that also has its own statements. And those are all perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Often we'll see, oh, no, we all need to use one. My view is as long as there's an alignment and coordination and you don't see in your visions, your missions, or your value statements any disconnect or any working at cross purposes, then I think that's fine. For the purposes of this particular grant, these seem to be sufficient. Again, my initial reaction would, these would seem to be sufficient in the sense of your work on your tribal opioid response is consistent with what we're seeing in this language. Pam, any other? Is that, and maybe I don't know, Jeff as well. Is that seems to be um, appropriate, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I see Kim has shared a comment as well. They're not doing a general comprehensive plan, but one more focused on opioids, and so they're going to start general and then transition. And this is a question in her mind down to health and wellness, and then you'll go into more specifics with the opioids, and then leave off all the other things the tribe does. Are we doing that segue? Yeah, that might be a sort of as you layer through the strategic plan, or you come up with your own vision and mission. It's really just setting it out. So you could have your standalone strategic plan. You could build it as a component of the existing strategic plan. I think it's just the way what's the context you set in your draft. So in the very first webinar we did leave an outline, and I think it actually might even be in that slide earlier. There's a bit of a rough outline for a strategic plan. So again, just look at that and then see where you would then sort of, anchor those in sort of that outline. It's probably another way to go with that. Yeah, and maybe Evangeline, based upon what you've got there, are you simply going to work with that, or were you planning to do any editing of that to be more opioid specific? Okay, so yeah, plans on editing to specify, or well, yeah, but to specify opioids. So just to mention that as an example, as opposed to recrafting it to be an opioid specific vision and mission, just to make a distinction there. Awesome, and then connecting to the existing tribal action plan. And I presume, again, that's the tribal action plan, which is going to allow them to live up to their values and incorporate their values, do the work set out in the, as set out in the mission statement, and thereby, move closer to and, create that vision in the community. All right, and again, so as people have them and you're willing to share, there'll be some emails at the end of the session as well. So even between sessions, there'll be an opportunity to provide information through the technical center, where you're willing to share and able to share. I think that all helps, kind of helps everybody. You want to respond to Ted's comment there? Thanks for sharing, Ted.
And Harold, who are you wanting to respond?
Take a look at Ted's comment.
Yeah, and I'm not able to see it. Maybe
Oh,
you
okay.
can read it.
So this is Evangeline's cohort, CAPT Ted Hall. We have a comprehensive and well-developed Vivitrol MAT program in which we intend on creating a mission and vision for this program to align with the Tribal Action Plan and all other statements. So again, existing visions and missions, Tribal Action Plan, this smaller piece of an opioid specific thing then becomes aligned with that.
Yes, and so in that instance, it sounds like you're right on track, and to tie back to the goal for this funding was really to increase access. So it sounds like, if I'm understanding this right, you have the medication-assisted treatment in place. Now the question is everyone who needs it being able to access it, or are there certain barriers that need to be removed or reduced so that maximum access can be provided there?
Awesome.
And then also around the other goal being around opioid overdose related deaths. So, what is happening there? What can be done to make sure that folks have access to overdose reversal, and that treatment is provided to prevent opioid overdoses from happening.
Okay. All right, I see Laurie is typing, but maybe what I'll do is sort of start moving to the core values, which is sort of the second to last section of our presentation today. And then we'll see. Okay, so Laurie there. I'm assuming everybody can see the chat message, but again, she's talking about sort of the different players that'll be brought to bear and sort of this network, sort of collaboration. And again, this is I would think a key strategy that you would then use and could note in your plan.
And I want to add that's also a great strategy because while we don't know the long-term possibility for these funds, you have them for this 2-year period. And so looking at how to leverage other partnerships and other existing resources, and how to work out ensuring that when these funds are gone, that access to medication-assisted treatment and also other evidence-based prevention, treatment, and recovery activities for OUD are occurring. And so that would hopefully be considered. And partnerships is a great way to work towards that.
Mm-hmm. And then it looks like Nephi Harlan is noting that in addition to those that Laurie mentioned, they have other partners, other people that can be brought together in a bit of a collaborative network, law enforcement, halfway houses, tribal courts. So again, more whole system in the sort of in the room kind of approach. So awesome.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention also that we do see a lot of issues with child welfare and protective services, that there's a lot of misinformation around whether or not parents can safely parent when they are receiving medication-assisted treatment. And of course the answer to that is yes. If they're receiving medication-assisted treatment and appropriate other therapeutic supports, that is not a barrier for them to be an effective parent. And yet if that information is not well understood by the community partners, by the courts, by child welfare practitioners and such, then that can be a real barrier for parents to, seek access for medication-assisted treatment if they feel it will be held against them and that they may lose custody of their children. So you're very smart to work with those collaborative partners and to factor that into, even yesterday we talked about some of the workforce development activities that you might want to engage in to help sort of prepare your community for everyone working towards the same goal, getting everybody on the same page with their understanding of these issues.
All right, just given the time, we're at 3:05 or 12:05, depending on where you are in the country. We have about 25 minutes left, so maybe we'll move to the brief discussion of core values. And so Evangeline provided an example, so that was awesome. But essentially, what you see in core values is often you'll see these statements, and they're lovely statements, and then sort of that's all they sit. And sometimes what happens is they become sort of a place to put things, that we're not sure what to do with in some respects. But really, the intention of the core value statement or the guiding principles statement is to, in a way, set a standard for how the organization is going to behave and to provide some guidance in terms of decision making, and sort of in terms of what goes into the rest of your plan, and then in the midst of your plan as you're implementing, when you have to make choices, vision, mission, core values, and guiding principles, these are should be helping you to make those decisions, helping you to make those choices. And in some respects, when you look into the body of a strategic plan, you should be able to see how these statements are carried through and sort of getting into a bit more granular detail. Second bullet point there, we provide there is actually a definition of the distinction between values and principles. And it's kind of important to know that generally this distinction gets sort of glossed over in the process as you're trying to come to consensus on a statement. Again, it could be a good organizing way to deal with that, but often in the politics of planning, that's difficult to do. And I'll show you an example that I just recently worked on where that, essentially it was nice to know the distinction, but they were committed to what they had in their current strategic plan and were unwilling to change it. So again, those next two bullet points really emphasize that point I just made about there is a translation of these values and principles into the work of the strategic plan, the content of the strategic plan, and the way the organization behaves, the culture of the organization itself, the roles and responsibilities that people need to fulfill. Yeah, so and again, bottom there, the example. So if protecting the environment is held as an organizational value, it should figure heavily into consideration and decision making about what you're going to be involved in and what strategies and tactics you're going to do. And that's a pretty strong challenge for us in the tribal communities. We do struggle with that in some respects, given our needs. Characteristics of a good core values and guiding principles. Relevant. Again, that sort of, if a principle is sort of, let's go back here just to emphasize that. So if a principle is, more permanent, unchanging, and universal in nature, then in some respects, when you're looking at these should be, slow to change, right? They could be immutable forces that we need to deal with. You do need to make sure that they're widely held, and there is that sense of ownership and commitment to them. Yeah, so substantive beliefs. This is not the place for slogans again or sound bites. You can pretty it up with some of the language. You can, again, be very inspiring in this piece, but just trying to make a distinction between, sort of the tagline, which we often talk about and which some of the models of strategic planning encourage you to use. just trying to be clear about the distinction here. Yeah, so here, just emphasizing this piece about it is a thing you want to communicate out, but it's also really you want to incorporate it internally, and so it's primarily and it's not intended to be purely promotional or public relations related. Yeah, so again, it should affect your behavior. Here's an example. So I worked with a group, and they had done a number of strategic planning exercises over the years, and other kinds of retreats and trainings. And this was a child welfare group, and so they had a set of value statements. You know, again, you can see the 7 traditional values in there when you really look at that. So I might have argued those might be guiding principles, you know, if I was to quibble with the definition. And they also had some guiding principles. The guiding principles were drawn from a strategy which was used to ensure holistic care in a child welfare context. And, you know, to ensure that the tribes and the indigenous peoples sort of had the recognition of the strongest authority to make decisions for their own children. And so those were the ones that were there. So we had a long discussion about the distinction between values and principles, and, you know, perhaps we should be doing some work to recraft and reshape and shifting some of these to strategies, for example, or, you know, that kind of stuff. In the end, they were happy with what they appreciated, the clarity, but they were happy with what they wanted. They had a real sense of ownership of what they wanted. So what we wound up doing was this next slide. It didn't translate well when I sent it in, but essentially what it was is we put the values in a circle around the outside, and then there were arrows pointing in to the principles, and then that all fed to the center, which was children and family in the center. At least I don't see the circle and arrows on the one I see on my screen, so I'm not sure if that translated. But essentially that was if you'll pardon the phrase, the politics of planning compromise we made, because it did the job that they needed it to do. And so again, that's the tool adapted to work for them. This last slide here, in terms of vision, mission, core values, and principles, is the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe's recent strategic plan that I had the privilege of working on. And essentially, this is one of those Grove graphics that we've modified to use as a summary. They've since taken this graphic, and their communications and marketing department has reshaped it in their own sort of their own way. But this is the one that we had put in their original strategic plan. So their vision: a healthy and prosperous Mohawk environment where every member has the opportunity to succeed at home and in the global community. So thinking about that, and does the opioid response strategy fit there? And my view would be, yes, it does fit there. It is contributing to that achievement of that vision. In terms of a mission statement, we've kind of broken it down into the 5 circles that you see in this particular slide. So accountable government and professional organization that benefits the community. Building the path through which community development can be fully realized now and in the future. Exercising tribal sovereignty in all the tools of government. Developing its capacity as a service delivery organization, and engaging in collaborative partnerships that expand its impact. So again, when you look at the proposed activities, in many of the tribal applications in this process, and I haven't looked at St. Regis's, for example, the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe's example yet. But, you know, I could see where it could be aligned. So it could be a piece of developing its capacity as a service organization, engaging in collaborative partnerships that expand its impact, you know, building the path through which community development can be fully realized. So to me, this strategy, you know, has a resonance and alignment with its mission statement of this particular organization. And then in the top right, you do have the principles that they agreed to at this point, which was strengthening Mohawk culture and identity, advocating for rights, sustaining opportunities, pursuing continuous improvement, being respectful, being proactive, embracing diversity. So again, you know, if we were to apply the lens of the definitions of values and principles, we might want to, quibble with that, move that around a little bit. But essentially, again, in that conversation, this is where they came to, and that's helped them to deal with a lot of the issues that came up in the process of engaging the community and the tribal organization in strategic planning. Just to finish off the rest of this slide, so in terms of the 5 core strategies that they organize their strategic plan around, those are the ones we put in the arrow, and essentially, they're reflective of the vision. They hadn't done a strategic plan in a long time, and so even when we did it, I thought, well, these are fairly, obvious to me as a strategic planner, but really they were about developing that consensus and that agreement across the tribe, and which is, now quite large and quite diverse, uh, around some common themes that everybody could be one, committed to, be informed by, and contribute to. So enhance the effectiveness of tribal government, develop professional program and service delivery organization, plans program and service growth on our own terms, support sustainable revenue generation capacity, engage in collaborative community development. From a tribal opioid response strategy, I would say that it's clearly connected to 5, engaging in collaborative community development and planning program and service growth on our own terms, because as many of the tribes have said, these are the things we will do to make it fit with our community, while we pay, due respect to the FOA itself. Just to finish this off, essentially what you have on the right and left at the bottom there, this is the tribal organization as it is. And because I hadn't done one in a long time, it kind of came as a surprise that the organization had grown so much. So essentially in the, let's say 10, 15 years ago, what we had was tribal programs and we had a tribal council. But in the last, while, as the community has grown, as the organization has grown, they've added a number of institutions and systems. And so on the left, you see essentially all the governance related mechanisms that they have, including the courts and the police. And then you also see the tribal enterprises that they've been able to develop. And, so again, in that terms of the economic horse pulls the social cart kind of thing. On the right, you see the tribal programs and services. And what they all did was they were required in all of these component parts that you see there to develop supportive. While the strategic plan had its own 3, 5, and 10-year goals, which is what they called for, each of these components had to develop a very brief linkage to the work that they were doing and how it connected to the 5 core strategic directions in the tribal vision and mission. And so for each of those, there is a 2 to 3 page let's say we called it a strategic implementation plan is what we called it for each of those subgroups. And health has one, and then each of the various divisions in the health department had one as well, because it's a fairly large health department. Anyway, that was just again to respond to the request yesterday that we start providing examples. We didn't have any, at this point, any tribal opioid specific strategies at hand, and we hadn't crafted new wording or suggested wording at this point, so I thought it would be worthwhile to share that. So that's it in terms of the presentation of the material. We do go to the final sort of round of questions before we do some sort of next steps and closing. Any further questions or comments from our participants? And once again, anyone brave enough to want to try the hands up? Will these slides be available to us? If you look to the right of the chat box, there's a files section and the handouts there. That is the PowerPoint slides. So if you click on that, you'll be able to download it. And then as Kate had said, this will be archived on the website, and then if you go back to it, you'll have access to all of this, including all of the comments and the shared vision and mission statements that were provided. A question from Annette, and maybe go to you, Kate. How did they access yesterday's slides?
So thank you, Annette. We will be sending out emails to everyone who attended. And so the ones from yesterday, we're still working on the recording and getting that up and available. So we should have that in the next couple of days. We'll send out the link to the recording, the handouts, and as well as the link to the survey that we would love for you to take. And so we'll actually send that out to the whole tribal opioid response listserv. So you'll get that from today's webinar and yesterday's. Yeah, it should include all of those pieces.
Yeah, and there's a couple of people who are saying they weren't included yesterday, but when you send the email out, you're going to send it to the entire list of tribal grantees, I presume.
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm sure there are people that weren't able to attend during the times we scheduled, so we want to share those with everyone.
And also, just as a reminder, if you weren't able to attend the very first one where we sort of did, here's an overview of strategic planning, and here's how we're connecting it to the TOR, and where we first introduced the rapid strategic planning template, that PowerPoint and that archived webinar already available on the site?
Yes, that is on the page. So if you go to the website, which is attcnetwork.org/native, you'll see there below there's a list of the webinars, and as we get the registration set up for each of those, you'll see a link to the registration. And then in I'll add this below with the date when the original webinar was there, but we'll include links. Right now it's sitting in the second paragraph, the link to the recording of that first orientation webinar, but we'll add that to the list of webinars below, and it'll have a link to the recording and the handouts of that one too.
And Jeff, I see you've added a hot link there. Did you want to?
Oh, that's just a link to the TOR webpage where all these resources.
Okay, awesome. So, all right, thanks, Jeff. Any other questions? Any other recommendations for improvement? Oh yeah, so the clarification there, Kate, from Veronica about that issue about the different times that were sent for the webinar. And then let's just confirm Friday's webinar is the same time as today's?
Yeah, so I will, sorry about that. The Adobe Connect system has a email template formatting that I'm going to try to remove the timing, because if I just set it to send out the time that we set it at, it's only going to show Central Time. So I will try to always include in our emails the list of times for all time zones, so that I would refer always to those. The ones where we send out the registration should include. We'll make sure to include all time zones on that.
Yeah.
And yes, the webinar on Friday is at the same time as today's. So that's starting at 2 p.m. Eastern. And we'll send the registration form out this afternoon, and that'll include all the time zones.
Yeah, and Kate, our goal is to have them all at 2 o'clock Eastern.
Yeah, so that should remain consistent now. So yeah, thanks so much for your patience as we've figured out some of the kinks of that, and yeah, it's been great to be with you all today.
Okay. All right. The other thing I would say is I appreciate the thanks on the chat room, but also we do want to encourage some more interactivity. So give some serious thought to raising your hands and speaking to everybody. So what will happen is, as Kate explained, that your mic would then be open. Um, and maybe, Kate, just explain that a little bit in terms of what they need to do in order to be able to speak to us.
Yeah, so if your computer has a built-in microphone, or if you have used the phone call-in number to listen to the audio, then you would have an option to speak. If you, right now, I don't keep microphone rights for all of the participants, so we hopefully don't have a lot of noise. But if you go up to the little person holding their hand up on the top menu bar, you'll see the down arrow actually gives you some options, which like that, those, if you put like, if you select agree or disagree or step away, those things actually just show up next to your name. So those are not something that will necessarily be useful except for to the presenters. But if you click on the raise hand option, then I will get a notification that you want to say something, and I can give you the rights to speak, and that can just make it a lot simpler for people to ask questions or to explain a particular situation. So yeah, we would love to have people utilize that as well.
All right, great. About 5 minutes left, so perhaps we'll move on to the closing stuff. So I'll turn it back over to Kate and Pam.
Okay, I think we just covered the closing. So this is a reminder where when the next webinars are, and this Friday's, the topic is environmental scans, SWOT analysis, capacity considerations, and priority setting. We follow November 16th with developing objectives and strategies to align with TOR goals. This will be very practical, where the examples will align very much with what the work that you are doing and with recommendations that you align to what you proposed in your applications. And then November 19th and 28th, bringing it all together, where we will have an interactive discussion with grantees who are willing to share samples of the plans that they have developed. And I think we already have one that has either come in or will be coming in the next few days. And then the TOR resource page, the website to that we will give you in just a minute. I think we've talked about that a bit today. And we will begin adding other resources there as well. And then we would like to hear from you if you have ideas about the topics that you would like to have prioritized for the event that we are hoping to have in, I think it's going to be the second week in April. We don't have the firm date yet with the hotel in Mystic Lake, Minnesota, but that will be communicated with you as soon as that's finalized. And we hope there to have, just to give you an example, let's say a panel discussion that might have physicians, native physicians who have experience with medication-assisted treatment, and that can share what their experience has been like, and then other grantees that might have also had experience in this area, and how they approached this, and what other kinds of prevention and recovery supports surrounded that effort, and how to increase access to medication-assisted treatment, and how to also work with culturally relevant supports to make this happen. And so to be able to hear from various individuals with experience in this area at the event in April, if there are particular topics, again, very specific. I think yesterday, if I gave anyone the impression that we can provide training on anything in the entire world, that was not my impression or my intention. That our TA has to be very specific to what is proposed under this TOR initiative, and so anything like that you would like to propose, we welcome that feedback. Then we also want to remind you to please send in your TOR application if you would like, and the address there to tor.ta@JBS International, and that will help us better help you in terms of determining what kinds of TA might be helpful, and also as we look for peer-to-peer opportunities for sharing, for us to know, how we might, connect grantees with each other that have similar challenges or that might have similar solutions, or to pair folks that have solved a particular problem with perhaps a tribe that's struggling with that problem. So for the greater good, that would be very helpful. And then this is the TOR resource page. The attcnetwork.org/native is how you would access all the materials that we've talked about, and PowerPoints and other resources. And we are looking forward to working with you to do great things. So we very much appreciate your time and attention, and we're coming in right at 3:30. That was masterful, Harold, how you did that. And we want to remind you that if you have any specific questions about this initiative in terms of the TA, to please contact Jeff at the information that is provided on this slide.
Yep. And so, Jeff,
with that, we will go ahead.
I was going to say, and so final word to Jeff.
I just want to thank everyone for coming.
Okay, and just a note here. Thank you, Jeff. Just want to note Kim's comment here, grand round sentence application, but doesn't recall an acknowledgement that it was received. So I think that Pam just follow up on that.
I didn't hear the last thing. There was an echo.
If you just want to follow up with Kim on that. Kim Rogers from Grand Ronde.
And I did. Okay, and there was can you repeat the question?
She sent their application in, but doesn't recall an acknowledgement.
Oh, fabulous. Wonderful. Wonderful. We will do that. Thank you very much, Kim.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And which was helpful. And we will gather once again at 2 p.m. Eastern on Friday. Okay, take care.
Bye, everybody.